Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and Happy New Year! I hope everyone had a wonderful December. If you give each other gifts or get gifts, I hope all your gifts were magic cards, because why would we need anything else? We are starting this new year with an Angel Kindred deck of Gisela Blade of Gold Knight. This is a deck that comes from GP, who says they're looking for general improvements and aren't looking to make the deck EDH power leveled. I don't see any fear of that. This is, as an Angel Kindred deck, this falls into a lot of the zones that I think we find with, Hydra Kindred, demons, dragons, this kind of stuff, where we have the strongest, if not the highest mana value creature type of each color. There are some ways we can improve any form of Kindred deck that relies on a high mana value throughout its deck, which will probably be the first thing I bring up in a moment. But first, let's take a look at our commander and why Gisela Blade of Gold Knight is the best, in my opinion, Angel Kindred commander. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. Did you like that? I said it was the best. I'm doing the YouTubes where I tell you something that you have to keep watching to believe. Gisela Blade of Gold Knight is a 7-mana legendary angel in red and white. They have flying and first strike, and they have two very important abilities. The first one, of course, is if a source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent your opponent controls, that source deals double damage. And if a source would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, it is halved instead. Very simple. Gisela doubles damage against your opponents and halves it against you and your permanents. Now, something that's really, really important about this is that where that damage comes from is irrelevant. So for example, if you can get your opponents to deal damage to themselves, it will still be doubled. Likewise, it'll still be halved even if you are the one doing damage to yourself. Now, this could be important for things such as using City of Brass or any other like damaging land or damaging creature ability. You have to remember that loss of life won't happen, but a card like City of Brass will do 2 damage to your opponents. Of course, it will still do 1 damage to you because of the rounding situation. But still, this is a very powerful ability. It is known that like having damage doublers is a generally good thing, especially in aggro decks, but Gisela is way more than that. She's a damage doubler and a damage haver for you. I say have, I'm putting an L in there, I hope you can hear it. She halves your damage coming at you. And having that ability in the command zone is rather good. Now, with that in mind, looking at the deck itself. Now, I've taken a look at this deck, and I'm sure a lot of my viewers who may have opened it will also recognize that the first thing that we're going to start is perhaps the most important considering this deck, which is our mana curve. At 36 lands and a curve that seems more of a plateau than anything else, this deck is going to have a hard time casting a lot of its higher mana spells and summoning its higher mana creatures. Something very straightforward that we can notice right away is that I think I did the math of maybe more than, I think it was upwards of 25% of the deck is 4 mana or above, or 5 mana and above, and that's just simply a little too much. We have to be a little discerning. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these angels in the latter half are insanely powerful, and we do have some like fun interactions such as Heartless Hitsuku or Brash Taunter, so there is some fun to be had here, but I think we're getting into a situation where we've got too many of the deck is made of bombs, I guess is what I want to say. A series of bombs that all feel really strong. And don't get me wrong, especially in lower power pods, this is going to be great because your opponents just cannot come back after like bomb after bomb after bomb. But it's going to be very difficult to cast those bombs, not even including the cards we have at 8 mana, which have no ways to cheat them in play. We are just fairly casting these cards. we're really just relying on mana reduction and mana ramp, which white and red doesn't have a ton of. So I think my main goal when it comes to cuts is to do some reduction in the higher mana cost region, which allows us to talk about some really high mana cards and especially high mana angels and how we feel about them. But we're going to go in reverse order. I'm going to start off, let's just have a quick thing on lands, and then we'll go enchantments, artifacts, all the way to creatures last. So quickly for lands, I would suggest that in a deck like this, I really do want 37, 38 lands. I know that is rather high, but this is a deck that needs to hit every single one of its land drops, because as we go down, we can see if we start at 4, we've got a 62% chance of playing this on curve. Now, of course, this doesn't, I'm pretty sure this doesn't count mana rocks, but it's still worth considering. This goes to 45 at 5, 31 at 6, and 20% at 7. I think for a deck like this is generally unacceptable if you're going to want to be able to take advantage of a lot of different abilities that I think, and like strong cards that you need to put together for your deck to function. So if we're looking past, if at 4 we're not even at like 70%, the odds of getting like 6 and 7 get really, really bad. And I think just putting 2 extra lands at least are going to make a bit of a difference, and I think it's worthwhile. There's also something to be said about bounce lands and how powerful they are in red, white, and especially mono white decks, because not only do bounce lands activate some of white's catch-up mechanic, so I'm talking about catch-up ramp cards such as Knight of White Orchid. We're going to see them, they're in my editions, but cards like this that say, hey, are you low on land compared to your opponents? And things like Boros Garrison is very, very good at doing that, because of course it enables us to be down a land without actually being down a land. But cards like Boros Garrison, of course, as those of you know, actually are in a form of allowing you to repeatedly play lands even if you don't have any. So like Plains and Boros Garrison is 3 turns of mana land drops, which is really, really powerful of keeping you on curve. That means of those 3 turns, while you're doing that, which is of course in Commander you draw on your first turn even, that's 3 chances to draw a land or multiple lands that enable you to keep curving out at a good rate. And that's a really, really powerful effect. And part of the reason I still like bounce lands to this day. Now, of course, there's a few others we can put in. There's Karoo, which is, I think, the original bounce land. And there's also the Guildless Commons. I don't exactly remember, but it's the bounce land that's colorless. Those will make a big difference. And before we go into past lands into enchantments, I think it's something also worth noting. Looking down here in mana color production, we have 53 and 58%, 53 for red, while we only have 33% of all symbols in red. And I would say if we immediately subtracted 3 off of a chroma, actually we can't do that because we don't have a way to cheater into play. So let's just say for the sake of it, 33% is red. I think 53% of mana production for 33% is great. But looking over at white, where we have 63% of our deck is white and we only have 60%, and I'm rounding up, of our mana that taps in white, that's kind of unacceptable, I would say, at this rate, especially when we have cards that have regularly 2 white pips. Taking some of these 6 mountains out and turning them even just into plains, not counting the things like Karoo or things like City of Brass, any kind of card that taps for multiple colors, it's just going to make a big difference, and I think you'll feel it right away. Okay, let's talk about individual cards. Let's start with enchantments. I generally like how we start here. Luminarch Ascension is one of my favorite cards, and I think it's very well placed here. Ghostly Prison, I think, is fine here, though I have my problems with the card. This is the exact kind of deck I think it will do rather well in, because you need the time, and at this power level, aggressive players are abound, so being able to tax their mana is going to make a big difference. But then immediately we start going into a zone where I start having a bit of a hard time. Anointed Procession is a doubler for tokens in a deck that I think is very medium on tokens. Don't get me wrong, there are cards, including the next one, that do create tokens, and we definitely have angels here and there that will create tokens, but it's too few. Like Luminarch Ascension and Resplendent Angel are real cool, and if you generated 2 4/4s for the price of 1, you'd be very, very happy. But is it worth the 4 mana of Anointed Procession? I'm inclined to say no. This card does very, very little in the deck, and I think most of the time it's just going to rot on the battlefield. So I'm very happy to cut it. Following up with Assemble the Legion. Now, I want to be a little heavy on Assemble the Legion because I just don't think it's a deck here. Like, this is the kind of deck that really benefits from it. Even with the doubling mechanic out of our commander's damage and the fact that these soldiers... Well, the fact that the soldiers take half damage really doesn't mean much. Assemble the Legion creates 1/1s. Doubling them into 2/1s on damage isn't really impressive when you think about it. There's a lot of white enchantments that'll do that itself. So Assemble the Legion isn't really taking huge advantage out of your commander, but something that's even more important is this is a very slow win condition in a deck that already is not quick. Like, I get if you've played this one-on-one, like, and I love this card. Assemble the Legion is insanely powerful. You can see how quickly it ramps. But when you're getting only one other muster counter every turn cycle, which is 4 turns, it takes a long time for Assemble the Legion to do anything. And you just don't have that kind of time. You're spending 5 mana on a card that gets you a 1/1 the next turn when you could have been dropping an angel. I don't really see it, and I don't know to what degree I really like it. So this would be an easy cut as well. Dictator of the Twin Gods, I think, is really cute here. I do like it. It doubles damage to all things, to permanents and players. What's important about this is it works really well with our commander because that doubling damage against you is not that important when all of a sudden it just returns damage to normal amounts while your opponents are taking 4 times damage. That's really, really big. And the fact that this is a flash card is really, really cool, allowing you to play it with it in an interesting way. That being said, in a deck like this, I think most of the time you're just playing this at sorcery speed and attacking. I do like it, and I like it more than the other 2 doublers we're going to see, and I think this one should stay. Divine Visitation, once again, not really the deck that I want it to be in. Like, I think even if we look into here and see the tokens that we are generating, we see we have 4/4 angels, which means those 4/4 angels that we create out of Luminarch Ascension or Resplendent Angel actually don't work with Divine Visitation at all because they're 4/4 angels to begin with, and now they're going to be 4/4 angels. Then we have the... oh. Interesting. I forgot that these will come in. Sorry, just to go back, the giving the vigilance does matter. So let me re-say that. Luminarch Ascension and Entreat the Angels will make 4/4s that will gain vigilance off of the Divine Visitation, and things that come off of Resplendent Angel already have vigilance and therefore don't gain anything. That being said, I still don't think that's good enough because I don't really think giving these angels vigilance is worth 5 mana. I think that's pretty straightforward, whereas vigilance is a very cheap ability to give your creatures. Looking into birds, a Maria Angel is the only creature that makes birds. Sure, it'd be great if they're angels, but, you know, it's not particularly important. And then, of course, Assemble the Legion and Battle Angels of Tyr make 2 other forms of tokens. All this to say, I'm not particularly interested. This is only creature tokens, so I did say treasures, but those don't matter. So, once again, really good with Assemble the Legion, but we've got a situation, we've got 2 5-mana cards to make a combo that's just okay. Like, this isn't Sanguine Bond and... the other half, which I always forget. It doesn't immediately win the game. Instead, you're in a situation that you're pumping out 4/4s, which is cool, but at a really slow rate. I think Divine Visitation, much like Assemble the Legion and Anointed Procession, belong in a dedicated token deck. Alright, Fiery Emancipation and to an extent City on Fire. These are both triplers. City on Fire I think just doesn't belong in this. Once again, put it in that token deck because paying 8 mana for this card is silly. Please don't do that. You're going to want to convoke, and you're a deck that doesn't make a lot of bodies, so you are convoking very, very slowly. Put it into a deck that really benefits from it. Fire Emancipation is 6 mana for a tripler. Don't get me wrong, I love triplers, but once again, just not the right deck here. I think you can do much better in a Stuffy Doll deck or another kind of damage bouncing deck that allows you to keep tripling and getting really, really high numbers out of very simple spells. Just not here. The last one, enchantments, once again, another high mana, a 6 mana spell is Warstorm Surge. Warstorm Surge is a card that I think I do undervalue, and I think most players do as well, because when this card is good, ooh boy, is it really, really good. But that being said, I think it belongs in a dedicated Blink deck. It belongs in a deck that can cheat into play a lot of creatures very, very quickly with very high power. Whereas here, you are playing this as fair as humanly possible. Warstorm Surge comes out, and then you drop an angel, and let's be generous. Let's grab one of our 7 mana angels. Sephara, actually she gets cheated into play, so let's grab a 6 mana angel, Sunblast Angel, or Aurelia, or Angelic Skirmisher. Like, these are all 4-ish. You're dealing 4 damage. And if you say, but cursed, I've got my commander out, or the 7 mana card I play after Warstorm Surge is our commander. Okay, Warstorm Surge into Gisela, does 10 damage immediately. That's cute. I still don't think that's worth the 6 mana. Like, you can do way more damage way easier, so doing this damage towards one target, any target mind you, but one target, doesn't feel impressive. It's like you're loading a cannon with an angel every turn, and that sounds really cool, but it's just really, really slow. Without a way to blink your angels, you're just not taking advantage of it, and it just feels like you're spending so much mana to just not do enough. Going through our artifacts, I really do like almost all of them. The 2 ones I want to point out that, well, let's start with Embercleave. Embercleave, I think, once again, just doesn't belong in this deck. It belongs in more of a token deck. You just don't have enough bodies for it to make a big difference. But that being said, I want to keep Embercleave because if you can, A, reduce this by 2 mana, it's still a very good artifact. But also, I mean, if you play Gisela, you already have 6 mana. So you can drop Gisela? I'm really going to mess this up for the rest of the video. If you drop your commander and attach Embercleave to her, she's going to do 24 damage and one-shot a player. So I think it's definitely worth it. Maybe it's worth it also to consider one-time double strike effects, like instant speed double strike effects that I think are just going to be as good. But this is still a really, really nice card, so I don't want to, and it stays on the battlefield, so I don't want to dismiss it right away. Commander Sphere, I just wanted to point out that I think this is just too weak for a deck of this nature. We're really trying to do a lot here. We're trying to be good with our mana, and Commander Sphere should rather be just like a 2 mana mana rock. I think you'll be happier. And speaking of 2 mana mana rocks, I want to take a moment to talk about the medallions. This is something I see come up every now and then. I love the medallions. They just got reprinted. They're particularly cheap right now. And Ruby Medallion is the most expensive one while still being very affordable. That being said, I think people overvalue what these cards do, because the way you need to compare this card to something such as Felwar Stone or Arcane Signet is what are the literal, like, what are the perks and what are the differences? So the perks of the medallions are only really if you play multiple of the same colored spell in one turn. So what does that mean? If you cast 2 3-mana white spells, it'll reduce 2 colorless in total, which means this is a mana rock that tap for 2 colorless. That's Soul Ring level powerful, which I think is a pretty decent standard to hold yourself up to. That being said, there's 2 problems with that statement. The first problem is this doesn't affect cards that have tons of white, like colored pips, where it becomes more important to have colorless mana or colored mana. So for example, if you have Soul Ring and this and Resplendent Angel, you're kind of wasting all the colorless mana you could be producing, so it doesn't become as impressive. Of course, maybe you can use that colorless mana for something else, but it's still worth considering. The much more egregious problem is that we have situations where it just doesn't do anything. And I mean, like, not just with cards that don't have colorless pips, such as Path of Exile. I'm talking about situations where you're only casting one spell a turn. So if the only spell I'm casting is Baneslayer Angel because I have 4 mana with the the Pearl Medallion, sorry. What happens there is that might as well have just been a mana rock. And as a mana rock, it probably would have tapped for a color instead of just removing a colorless there. And that's not even including things that this medallion will not affect, such as Solemn Simulacrum, such as Earthquake, such as Fiery Confluence, and we'll get back to those cards, don't worry, such as Acroma, Angel of Fury, such as Embercleave, which I think is a particularly important one. The fact that these only affect a portion of your deck is a big problem, and that's not even talking about Ruby Medallion, which is once again in a deck where only a third of the cards you have are red. Actually, that must not actually be true, right? That's a third. Well, apparently we just don't have enough no, because we have the colorless ones there. Okay, it does add up to higher, but it's not a third. It's 21 out of 64 non-let. So about a fifth of your deck is red. That's way too low for, I think, Ruby Medallion to really significantly do anything. And let's immediately start cutting off cards such as Deflecting Palm and Boros Charm that actually do not have colorless pips, but count towards that red number. So those are easy to cut. Perhaps you could just use the Talisman, the red-white talisman. You could use the red-white signet. You can use Felwar Stone. You can use, we already have Arcane Signet. I think those will be more than enough to make up for these cards. Going into instants, I'm a very, very big fan. Big fan of all that. Really, really great cards, easy to skip over. When it comes to sorceries, I really, really don't like Entreat the Angels, but goodness knows I'll never be able to convince anyone out of it. Idyllic Tutor looks here to be in the, to allow us to use the combos that are in our enchantments, but even then, the problem was not drawing Assemble the Legion and Anointed Procession or Assemble the Legion and Divine Visitation. The problem was casting them and spending our turns doing that. So I don't want to look at our 10 mana combo that doesn't win us the game and say it is now a 13 mana combo that doesn't win us the game. Goodness knows what would happen if your opponents had counter magic. I shudder to imagine. So with that, I think Idyllic Tutor could also very easily be cut. Looking at the rest down here, Earthquake, I'm having a bit of a hard time. I was talking with a friend of mine about it, and I do think, personally, I don't like Earthquake in this kind of deck, even though, let's be honest, this is the best Earthquake is going to get, where, you know, the damage is halved against you and your permanents, and in addition to that, because the majority of your creatures fly, Earthquake will just not hit them to begin with. That and doing double damage to all your opponent's creatures and them. This is, like I said, this is kind of like the best case scenario for Earthquake, and I still don't like it. So, like, spending 7 mana to do 12 damage to all your opponent's permanents while doing 3 damage to yourself and your creatures that are on the ground. I think I'd just rather deploy another angel than do that. Like, I'd rather have another threat to kind of finish the game than do this. I don't know. This one I personally don't like, but if you were to keep it in, I'd understand. The combination of this card and this deck makes sense. It is just the power level of Earthquake that upsets me. On the other hand, Fiery Confluence is cuter. I do like how this can be used modularly with our commander to do really, really cool things. But even then, that becomes, what, 4 mana for 12 damage at each opponent. That is a lot, but I don't know if I still particularly like this. This is still just a little too much mana for this kind of ability, whereas if I wanted something like deal 1 damage to each creature, it will, like, that's a 1 mana ability, so if I did it 3 times, that would be 3 mana, so I'd rather something just like Anger of the Gods, and for the 2 damage to each opponent. I mean, Price of Progress is already here, and it's way, way better than the other modes. So though Fiery Confluence has a lot of modality, is that a word? It's very modular, and I do like that. It's still particularly bad, I would say. Day of Judgment, Wrath of God, Blasphemous Act, fantastic card, especially Blasphemous Act feels like a much better Earthquake in this scenario. And though I do understand that we are an aggro deck and a creature deck, we do not want to have this many board clears, some might say. I really like having access to them because you never know how a game will go. All right, real quick, I'm going to go over some of the higher mana creatures because the majority of creatures I do, and the lower mana I do agree with and like, and will be adding to when it comes to additions. That being said, let's look very quickly at our high mana cards and see if there is anything we would like to cut. Avacyn, Angel of Hope, is a fantastic creature, and I could not bring myself to take it out of here. She is just very, very strong, and though we are not cheating her into play, putting her out there is just very, very good, so can't hate. Akroma, Angel of Wrath, is not my favorite. Both forms of Akroma, especially because we're not cheating in Angel of Fury, I think are generally overcosted for what they are. I do respect that Angel of Wrath has haste, and I think it's notable that Angel of Fury does not. So if you were going to keep one, I would keep Angel of Wrath, as it is much, much stronger. This is a fun fact because I think Akroma came up recently in a game I played at NTG Mudsta's channel where she has leopard legs. It's not in the art, but it's in the lore. This angel has the it's jaguar legs. She has the legs of a jaguar. Nothing to do with the card, just wanted to point that out. Akroma is just, I think, a little clunky for what she does. 8 mana, at least she has haste, relevant protection, and will gain you no life, not even lifelink. My goodness, very, very strong though. So I would, if you have to keep one, I'd keep her, but I personally would probably cut Akroma. Safara, I think, is particularly strong, especially if we have more flying creatures at low mana. I think it's easier. She being a 7/7 flying lifelink creature with awesome art, I'm a big fan of, so I think she's easy to keep. Anything that lets us get her out early, I think, will be a big boon on her side. Sunblast Angel, I do really like this card because it is a fantastic board clear that happens to leave a 4/5 flyer. I think it gets better if we have Blink, and there might be an argument to just include some Blink into the deck because I think it's just very much so worthwhile. Even if you don't though, this is a fantastic card, easy keep. Aurelia is now we're starting to have a bit of a harder time. I do like her and I do want to keep her, but she is kind of clunky when you're not ahead. When you are at medium, like if you are in the middle of the game and you're not ahead, you're neutral. That's what I'm trying to say. If you're neutral or you are behind, Aurelia is really, really bad. But when you are ahead, she is insane. And when it comes to like our win more cards, if we're comparing this to like Warstorm Surge, City on Fire, Fiery Emancipation, I like Aurelia way, way more because at least she's an angel on the battlefield. So I'm going to say keep her, but do note there's a lot of situations where she's not going to do much. I will say at least in neutral situations, you can at least attack for 6. Like if you are just dropping her and she's your only creature, you get that attack for 3 and 3 more, and that's something. Continuing the list, Angelic Skirmisher feels particularly weak. This is a series of abilities that I would not pay more than 1 or 2 mana for on a 4/4 flyer, which I mean in this deck is like a dime a dozen. So though it is really, really cool to say, wow, giving my creatures all this ability is going to really change combat, but I think in practice that's not going to be the case. Pop quiz, which ability do you give your creatures 90% of the time? If the answer was lifelink, I think you're correct because vigilance is kind of negated by lifelink. Your creatures are so big that you don't really need to leave them on defense if they like are chunking your opponents for huge amounts of life. Not even including the fact of how the math works with Gisela out, where you are doing let's say double damage, so you're doing a tremendous amount of life damage, gaining that as life, and then even if your opponents crack back as a total the same damage you took, you're still only losing half of that. So lifelink feels way, way better than vigilance, unless you wanted to just nullify all damage, because in theory, no one's attacking through your angels, so therefore you can just say vigilance and mostly protect yourself. Some opponents won't care, whatever. I don't think you're ever going to pick First Strike. First Strike is just not worth it. Your creatures all have evasion and they're all immensely powerful. I don't think First Strike is really going to matter because there's not going to be much in the air that you're going to care about. I'd rather be like Menace or Trample. I think those are much more relevant than First Strike, but it is what it is. All that to say, and that's a lot to say, is Angelic Skirmisher is not a card I like. This is a card that has a relatively bad ability, even if you consider it like an ETB, because it's not, and I generally would rather play any other angel. If she was like a 6/6 at least, I think maybe I'd feel differently, but at the time she was printed, it does make sense that she was a 4/4. Adarkar Valkyrie, though once again, sick art. I think this is a tricky one. I think it's really, really cool, and it feels really sweet to be like, oh yeah, she'll bring back my angels. And for an extent, she will blink them in a way. Like, if you lose Sunblast Angel, you'll bring her back and kill the Valkyrie. Even with that, I really think she's not that great. I like to note that she comes with Vigilance, and we just looked at a card. And I can see Avacyn's here still with Vigilance, so that previous card's Vigilance is just so bad. But I think this is such a clunky ability. You have to have her out, you have to give her haste or wait a turn cycle, and then for 6 mana, she is a Sarah Angel that will reanimate when your opponents kill your other creatures instead of her. And your opponents aren't going to do that. Your opponents are either going to... Oh wait, this is preemptive, sorry, this is a note. This is preemptive. You can use this in, like, there's a board clear coming. That being said, I still don't think it's going to matter. Your opponents are just going to remove the Valkyrie first, and then don't worry too much about, like, whatever you pick, and kill whatever they need otherwise. I think there may be this dream state where you have this and Avacyn, once again, right here, where there's no situation you can ever, like, ever lose in terms of destruction, but then Swords of Plowshares comes in and ruins your day anyway, so this feels overcosted for the ability. Easy cut. Lyra Dawnbringer, sure, I don't have a lot to say about her. She's a big beater, she works with angels, gives lifelink, which once again, why is Angelic Skirmisher even in the deck when there's such better cards such as Lyra? So no need to really worry about lifelink, it's right here. Still, just decent, no problems here. Herald of War, this is too cute, I think. She is really, really understated for an angel. Despite heralding the war, I really think she needs to stay back, which is funny because she needs to attack to get that ability off. Whereas, you know, maybe this deck desperately needs like a mass haste so you can just keep attacking with all your creatures all the time. But at the moment, this is just so clunky. She grows so slowly, and even then, this mana reduction is incredibly slow. I don't think she's worth it. I think you can cut her. Heartless Hitsugu and to an extent Brash Taunter feel like afterthoughts in this deck. I would rather them just be angels, or I'd rather them be in a either damage doubling, like not even a damage doubling deck, a stuffy doll deck or some kind of burn deck. Here they feel really, really clunky. Don't get me wrong, it's really cute that you get to play Heartless Hitsugu, take a turn off, cast your commander, and immediately win the game. Assuming your opponents don't have removal, they don't interact with a combo, they don't counter your spells. I think it's hoping for too much while like not doing what your deck wants you to do. That being said, it does have your opponent's life totals when you're the aggro deck and you have a lot of lifelink. Okay, I think I'm fine with it for now, but this is close. This is close to the chopping block. Okay, coming to the end, a lot of these 5 mana cards I think are fine. I have nothing to say. Let's go into additions because this video has gone a bit longer than I'd like. So let's start with a few 3 mana and other creatures that I think are particularly strong that have been printed recently. that are worth looking at. Wojak Investigator, or Wojak, sorry, is a particularly strong card. 2/4 Flying Vigilance is already great. 3 mana Angels are fantastic in a deck like this. And once again, there's a catch-up mechanic here where your opponents who have more cards than you get to investigate for each one. This is really good. This is really, really good. This is the kind of ability that I consider for non-Angel decks, and even not even Clue decks, that this is a fantastic catch-up mechanic, especially when you are the player who is probably going to have the least number of cards in your hands, because you just don't have card draw in the deck. So slapping this down, curving out and just dropping Angels, and when it gets back to your turn, being able to generate not just extra card draw, but mana sink for the amount of mana you have when you just don't have anything relevant is fantastic. In fact, I would suggest that you would keep the clues as long as you can, because there's just going to be a turn where the board is wiped, you're out of cards, and you're going to want to tap out like 8 mana to draw 4 cards. Once again, I'd just like to note, Vigilance, once again free. Do not play the Skirmisher. This is just there. Another Vigilance. It's Metropolis Reformer. This was an Aftermath card. I don't know if I'm the only one that believes that Aftermath just evaporated from their minds the second we were done. This is a very weird set, but something that is worth considering. Flying Vigilance, giving you hexproof is just really, really cute. I don't think I'm too mad about it. And this last bit of text where you gain life as it's dealt damage is kind of neat. Obviously, it works. It does not work well with our commander in the sense that she is taking half damage and therefore you are only gaining half of the life you would. But who cares, right? Like with a Blasphemous Act, this still gains you still 7 life, which is still pretty impressive. And this is not even including things like really easy blocks where you can block tokens and gain a little bit extra life, to stopping that one non-trampling creature and gaining like, what, 12, 13 life. Pretty good. The you have hexproof, I think, is going to be relevant, where your opponents might be incentivized to kill this creature. And if they kill this creature, I think you're really happy. Like, your removal against your creatures is really, really important, because your creatures are particularly important to you, especially the big ones. So if someone is going to use a spell against this, you've kind of come out on top. From Foundations, there's a few Angels here that I think are particularly good. Dazzling Angel, nice and easy, another 3 mana Angel. This one has a Soul Sister-like ability where whenever another creature you control enters, you gain 1 life. Once again, I really do just like her because she's 3 mana, and having lower mana Angels is going to make a difference. But there's also a kind of theme with life gain over the next 2 cards as well from Foundations that I think is strong and worth considering. Vanguard Seraph being the one that whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, you surveil 1, which when it comes to gaining a form of card advantage from life gain, this is one of the best effects they've printed for this. I really, really do like it, giving white an ability it just traditionally does not have, and making a huge difference when you can surveil lands off of the top, or, surveil non-lands off of the top. The last one of this, which I think is particularly important, is the Exemplar of Light. This card is very, very impressive. As you gain life, it grows, and then whenever basically the first time this happens per turn cycle, you get to draw a card. Per turn. You get to draw a card, and that's pretty good. It's card advantage. It's really easy to trigger. This isn't, of course, even considering things like being able to use your lifelink creatures very, very well, being able to block with them, being able to attack with them, triggering this very easily. This creature will grow very, very fast, and drawing you a few cards here and there, I think, is worthwhile. Speaking of smaller creatures and non-angel creatures, I did note there were some non-angel creatures, which I really do like. For those who don't do this, your Kindred deck does not need to be 100% of the Kindred group that you have named it against. It is better to play 10 really good angels and a bunch of other cards and still have an angel deck that way. I feel very strongly about this. I think a lot of people may consider this cheating. I leave that up to the viewer. I think having successful decks as in successful as in the measurement of the deck doing what it wants to do, not whether it wins. But having decks that are successful and do what they want to do is more important to me than sticking to a theme. So let's look at a few non-angel creatures. Giver of Runes and Mother of Runes are fantastic creatures that will protect your angels very, very well, and they're 1 mana and the deck is lacking 1 mana creatures. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, which let's find the art I like. This is very important. I really do like the original art from Dark Ascension. This is a card you just get to play because you are so heavy into creatures. I've asked you to take out a bunch of non-creatures, so she'll get better. But even if you don't, even if you keep all your non-creatures, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben is fantastic. As a test, I always suggest for people who doubt how strong a card like this is next time you play Thalia, take out a pen and paper and mark every time she triggers. Now, there's going to be games where she's taken off the battlefield right away, and I think that's still fine as an average. I think you will be impressed by the amount of mana she just drains from the table, ideally mostly from your opponents. Speaking of Thalia, I do love Thalia Heretic Cathar in this deck as well. Slowing down your opponents is a great way to make up for the fact that you are slower, and creatures being tapped allow you to be a lot more aggressive and getting attacks in. This, of course, can always create really good infighting against your opponents, and Thalia as a 3/2 first strike is a fantastic blocker or attacker. I really do like her, and I think she does belong in a deck like this. Thalia is just great. Play Thalia. So we have a few other cards that really caught my eye. Charitable Levy is a new card I do really like. Much like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, that non-creature spell costs one more to cast is very relevant when you are a creature deck. But that second text where after 3 times you get 8 planes into play and draw a card is just really important in a deck like this. Hitting your land drops is very important, and I think this is a pretty easy way to do so. Speaking of ramp, Wayfarer's Bauble is a classic ramp card that I really like. Very simple. You do have to kind of take off a turn or two to do it because it's easy to say, oh, it's just 1 mana and 2 mana, but you're trying to curve out, so it might be tricky to find room to cast and activate it, but you'll be happy with the results. It is worthwhile to get just that extra land. Catch-up cards, same mechanic. Knight of the White Orchid puts planes into play. Claim Jumper puts 2 planes into play if you are 2 behind or just 1. And Loyal Warhound also puts planes into play. Are these all tapped? I believe the only one that doesn't do tapped is Knight of the White Orchid, which technically makes it the strongest, but the catching up of these is really good. Like I said before, fantastic to be using this with bounce lands, so you are constantly behind on lands in play and get to ramp very easily. Coming to the end, the last cards I want to talk about, Lightning Bolt. It is a crime not to play Lightning Bolt in your red deck in Commander. I am tired of saying otherwise, and in 2025, I'm just going to make it mandatory. You got to remember how many commanders this kills, especially when your commander doubles damage. This is not just fantastic to 6 someone in the face, it is going to kill the majority of commanders in the game by doing 6 damage to them. So, got to play this, otherwise you go to jail. Them's the rules. Finally, my for fun edition. After taking out all of those high mana cards, I've got 1 high mana card I'd like to add in, even though technically I'm adding 2 cards. This is Bruna the Fading Light, and we're going to pair her with Gisela the Broken Blade. This is a pair of angels that of course fuse into Brisela Voice of Nightmares, which is going to win you the game pretty quickly as she is a terrifying Eldrazi angel. That being said, both halves of Brisela Brisela. I didn't think about that. That's a question for people who know how to pronounce it. If it's not Gisela, it's Gisela. Is it Brisela? Keep that in my mind. But both halves of our Eldrazi Angel are actually very strong. Gisela is just a 4/3 flying first strike lifelink, which is pretty good. Works with our lifelink creatures and is a pretty good beater. And of course, Bruna not only reanimates any of our angels, it can also reanimate Gisela the Broken Blade. You can also just leave your commander in the graveyard, cast this and get back. Do remember that because she's an Eldrazi, this is a cast trigger, not an enter the battlefield trigger. So it works not in the way you expect it. If you ever do get diffused into Gisela, Voice of Nightmares, I think you should win the game. Something has to be going real wrong for you not to be winning the game, but also you get all of the clout because that's awesome that you got to do this. I own these cards myself. I've had them in my cube for a long time. They're really, really cool. I think if you haven't melded these cards together, you got to try at least once. And with that in mind, that is my video, and those are the things I had to say. Thank you so much, GP, for sending the deck. I do love Gisela. I feel like I've been kind of harsh on it and the high mana stuff, but I really do think it's going to make a significant difference to lower the mana cost of the deck. The deck will be smoother, it'll feel right, and it won't feel like you're constantly waiting to do something. I hope this video was helpful to you, and good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.